Great. And we've got plenty of time for questions and stuff as well. So, Jim, do you want to do your part first, and then we'll move on? If you've got any burning questions, put them in the chat, or we can take them afterwards as well. Okay.
Right, can everybody see that? Can everybody see a slide screen? Fantastic. Thank you for that, guys.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, so today is it's a little bit of an introduction to community-led housing, basically. So for some of you, this will be stuff you already know. For some people, it will be hopefully a little bit of a helpful introduction into some of the basics about what we mean by community-led housing and what we do. So yeah, as Lucy said, there will be plenty of time to ask questions sort of towards the end. So if people can kind of maybe pop questions in the chat in the meantime as we record this, and then we can pick some of those up as we go. So just to introduce myself and Lucy, we are People Powered Homes. So we are a wholly owned subsidiary of Leeds Community Homes that you might have heard of. Leeds Community Homes is a community land trust for Yorkshire, but People Powered Homes is basically the host of the enabling hub. So what that means is we are recognised across primarily West Yorkshire as the organisation that's in place to help and support community-led housing across that area. We also work in other areas as well on a consultancy basis, but our main focus is in West and to a certain extent South Yorkshire. We are now funded directly by West Yorkshire Combined Authority as well, in terms of basically trying to support and encourage community-led housing. And we do that through working directly with groups at all different stages. Groups can be individuals, they can be groups of people, they can be community organisations. And we also work through trying to build what the sector, the movement of community-led housing to basically try and help change policies and make people more aware about what we're trying to do with community-led housing. So a bit of context on it. We believe that the conventional housing market is basically not doing what it should do. It is failing to create the right number of homes. It's failing to create homes that are affordable for people, and part of that is due to the way that it's basically a little bit of a financial numbers game. We've also got the situation where housing is about the creation of wealth and assets rather than the creation of places in the homes, and there's a bit of an alienation, we believe, between residents and people and communities, as opposed to the people and the organisations that are creating homes. And so what we were set up to do nearly 10 years ago was really to try and start and advocate a movement, we call it People Powered Homes, which is basically to try and work against that and try and basically bring homes back into the power of people to be able to create. And this statement is something that I feel very, very passionately about, which I think is one of the things that's really wrong about the way housing works in this country at the moment, is and I say basically nearly all the housing communities that we build, they're designed, built and delivered by organisations or parties who have no long-term genuine interest in either their quality or the sustainability or really anything about them in the long term. And I think that's one of the disconnects that we're trying to play a part in trying to change in this country and in Yorkshire particularly. So our vision mission coming out of that's the problem that we're stating, and our mission is to create a people-powered movement that enables the creation of the homes that communities need, and to enable specifically more community-led, sustainable and affordable homes in Yorkshire and in Leeds. So one of the questions that people coming into this for the first time would have is, what exactly do I mean by community-led housing? And that you will find lots of different definitions of community-led housing if you browse various different things online. But fundamentally, in my view, it is housing and homes that are created and owned by communities. So that means there's been some kind of meaningful involvement of the community through the process of development, and there is a long-term ownership in a wider sense by the community of that homes. It doesn't necessarily mean that the communities themselves physically own them, but they have an ownership, they have a stake in how the decisions and how that housing is managed. So part of what we do is part of what we think about when we do this is the creation of what we call intentional communities, and this is where you have a community, a body of people who have a stake in the process of creating housing. So that would be both looking at what the original vision of that housing is, having a stake and a say in how that housing is designed. So some of the individual features, perhaps, or some of the wider features. They have an influence in how it's delivered. So understanding what their process, what their place is in that process, and then in the long term, they're involved in decisions around management and how rules and conventions about how the community lives together goes. So there might be an element of sharing that goes into that, not necessarily, but it can be. So that might be in terms of facilities, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, space and cars and such like. And there's lots and lots of different models and in terms of community-led housing, and that's what we'll look into now. So very briefly, we're going to kind of skate the surface of some of this, but some of the examples of community-led housing that that there are stated down here. So co-ops, co-housing, community land trusts, custom and self-build, sometimes housing that's created by community organisations, so housing trusts and other types of things. The self-help housing, which is a slightly different type of thing that I'm not going to go into particularly today, but that's something there is a strong history of in Leeds through people like Canopy and Latch. And then sometimes it's something as broad as tenant and estate management organisations. I'm going to delve into a little bit more detail about some of those types of organisation. I'm going to start with co-ops. And there's a really, really rich history of co-ops in Leeds. Lots of examples of it. The co-op movement goes back to the 19th century, and it's all about, it's a type of organisation or business that is owned democratically and controlled by its members. So it's a member-owned and organised organisation. And it works to basically meet the needs of that organization. So a co-op doesn't have to be housing, it can be lots of different things, but in terms of housing, that need would be around creation of homes that are necessary. And there are a set of cooperative principles and values that all co-ops must have. And scale-wise, co-ops can be very, very different in scale. So there can be anything from just one household. This is one in Leeds on the left there, or there can be an organisation that's trying to create multiple households, and actually can be very, very much bigger than that. There could be hundreds, and if not thousands, of members if you take the co-op principle all the way up. So, but it's all about basically being owned and managed by its membership for the benefit of its membership, and that's the key point about co-ops. Community land trusts are a slightly different beast. They're democratic, they're non-profit, but they own and develop land for the benefit of the community. So that's the big differential with co-ops from community land trusts. Community land trusts are basically there for the benefit of the wider community, and that's always a very specifically defined community. So, for instance, Leeds Community Homes is a community land trust, and our defined community is actually all of Yorkshire. So that defines us, that demonstrates the community that we work for, and everything we do has got to be basically work back to the benefit of that community. So they're run by ordinary people. So we are owned and run by our members. We have over 300 members, and they all basically govern us through the process of our AGMs. They appoint our board and basically make up our board. And basically everything we do is essentially dictated to ultimately by what our members dictate on a one member, one vote basis. One of the important elements is stewardship of land or buildings for the purposes of this this homes discussion, and that tends to be so understood through the idea of having some kind of legal asset lock. And what that means is essentially if land or buildings or an asset is put in, is owned by the community land trust, it can't be got rid of without that being for the benefit of the community. So it can't be sold just for basic profit. It has to be any kind of disposal or sale of that asset has to be agreed to be for the benefit of the community. Co-housing is something we've been involved with a lot in recent years. Examples such as Lilac and Chapeltown co-housing. And this is what we call an intentional community. The idea of co-housing tends to be housing at a certain type of scale. So something that's at a human scale, so tends to not be much bigger than 20 or 30 households. And the real fundamental part of co-housing is there's an element of sharing within it. So it can actually be lots of different legal molds. Co-housing can be co-ops, it can be direct individual ownership. But the principle is there's always an element of mutualization, of sharing. So that can be, for instance, very typically that would include some kind of common house where people could have shared meals if they want to, and also other shared facilities which might include, for instance, laundry, could include guest bedrooms, might involve workshops, things like that. And then the other element is space, communal space. And very often there is at the heart of a co-housing scheme, there will be a shared community space. There are individual private properties within co-housing schemes, absolutely, and that's so there is private privacy within there, but often people will sacrifice some of their private space and private so for instance community their own private space within a scheme for wider community space. There's also tends to be a principle of sharing facilities. So often people will in a co-housing community will share a laundry rather than everybody necessarily having their own individual washing machine, for instance. And certainly things like sharing of yeah, you wouldn't have 30 individual lawnmowers on a 30 home scheme. You might have half a dozen and everybody would share it. So it's the idea of kind of sharing for the benefit of the community. They're run by them by their residents, and they don't have to be new build. They could be done within existing properties as well. But most of the examples that we've been involved with are new build. And then a really interesting aspect of community-led housing is community self-build. And this is where this can be anything from one person or family getting together just to build their own house on their own plots, or the thing we tend to be more interested in is community self-build. So the idea of a group of people coming together to do that, and the example here is Frontline, which was a where a community of people in Leeds came together and basically tried to create and sort of successfully in creating a fantastic scheme using their own labour from a disadvantaged background, coming together to create a really cool community in Leeds, and it's one of the ones that we're really proud of. So lots of different types of community-led housing, and it's really one of the difficult things when you're starting out is actually understanding which one you want to be part of, how do you actually decide what you're going to be. I'm going to give you a couple of case studies of some schemes, just for example. Chapeltown Care Housing, we completed this in 2024. I was the project manager. We created 29 homes. Now, this is a co-op, but it's also a co-housing community. So as part of the scheme, there's 29 homes. There's a common house. There's a shared community garden. There's a workshop that's currently being built as we speak still. And it was very, very much a values-driven organisation that was based on trying to create a community that reflected the wider community that it was built in. So that was reflecting the diversity and the age difference of people who live there. So it's a very, very mixed community. had a focus on environmentally friendly homes, and people had different families had a say in how those homes were designed and developed. So from a very early stage, the architect worked with us on all the different types of potential mixes of homes, types of homes, how those houses were laid out, and then later on, in terms of how what the fit out looked like, what the kitchens looked like, whether people had gas cookers or induction hobs and things like that. And lots of really important personal decisions were made that changed how people's houses and homes worked. There's also 3 self-build plots as part of this community. And if I move on to the picture there, you can see how some of the principles of co-housing are exemplified in there. You can see we're kind of looking out from the backyard, the back window of one of the properties here, and you can see everybody basically shares one big community space in the middle. Nobody has a private garden at all. The front of the properties look out onto quite a busy road. And there in the centre of the community, on the ground floor of that building in front of it is the common house, where there's a shared kitchen, shared eating space, some guest rooms, and then at the very end of that, the workshop is currently being built. And there's flats over the top of that as well. There's a little bit of an allotment space off to one side, but you can see how the focus of the community is kind of the shared element. Everybody looks in on themselves, onto each other. But all those individual dwellings are private. And then the second example I'm just gonna look at here is the example of Your Space and Lowfield Green in York. Now, this is a project that is currently on site at the moment. And again, we're doing the project management for the organisation. Now, this is a kind of an interesting mix, because Your Space is a community land trust, so it's set up to try and further the opportunities for people to basically get to afford home ownership in York, which is a very expensive market. And it was set up by some young people who basically were kind of stuck in generation rent, and they just couldn't see any way how they would ever get on the housing ladder. So that's where they started from, as Your Space, and that's how that's the benefit that they were trying to create for the community. But as part of that, they are developing a site in York for affordable housing, and the end users of that site are basically all members of a housing co-op. So the Lowfield Green Housing Co-op is coming together. They will all be individual buyers, so they'll all be individual purchasers. They'll own their own homes. The affordability side of it is because we've managed to basically work it out so that those individuals, those residents, can buy their properties at 70% of market value. And that is tied in perpetuity. So when they come to sell, they can only ever sell 70% of the value as well. So that is tied in forever. But they're all members of the housing co-op, and the housing co-op will own all the central communal spaces, and basically tie the community together. So we've got kind of 2 different types of community housing kind of overlap there. So it's not always kind of a single decision sometimes. And you can see it's also a co-housing community. You can see some of the principles of co-housing in there with the shared space. Ultimately, there'll be a common house. It'll be built in the future, because we're not quite doing it in the current phase. But it's also so you can see some of those different types of community housing overlap there. And yeah, this picture just shows where they are on the site. They're on a big new build estate that the council were building, and we managed to negotiate with the council to sell us part of the site. It's a part of the site that they set aside for self-build. So some of our closest neighbours are individual self-builders as well. So there's a real mix of different housing tenures on this scheme. And that's an example of where we are. That was a picture from last week, so you can see we're well advanced on getting those houses up, and that's some of the community there who are ready to move in. So you might ask, that's quite overwhelming in terms of all the different paths you can take. How on earth do you know where to start with all this process? Well, the lucky thing is that there are people who've gone before, and there are a lot of different routes through, but there is now a recognized kind of route through community housing. And we organize it roughly in 5 different stages. So you tend to start at the group stage, which is really kind of a foundational stage, and then go through different phases depending on what aspects you're looking at. So the group phase is about really setting the ideas in motion, understanding exactly what it is you're trying to do. The site stage is about actually trying to translate those ideas into a site and design and an idea of how a scheme would work, assuming it was a new build, and trying to work out how the financial model would work on that site as well. And then once we've got a site kind of set aside, or we think it's going to work, you move into the planning stage, which is much more detailed design, lots of collaborative thinking, like I was talking about with Chaka, looking at how we can translate that original vision, that original idea into the specific things of what we're going to build. How we're going to get the really important elements of that, whether it's sustainability, whether it's about collaborative living, whether it's about shared spaces, how we make all of that work on a design that we can then take through the process of getting designed up with an architect, going through the planning process as well and getting approval to do that. And then moving on to actually building the design that we've got planning for. And then once you've finally got over that last hurdle, how are you going to live? How are you going to occupy? What the rules of your community are going to be? And so that's a very, very broad outline of the process, and there's lots of more detail that go in there. And one of the things we do as People Powered Homes, one of our roles as the enabler, is how we can guide you through that process as a starting group. And when you're starting out, the really interesting things you've got to do is really kind of grab those ideas, define that, call it defining the dream, and that's our starting point. Getting this actually kind of getting the scope of what your project is going to be about, and understanding what the important things are, what the things you can't live without are, and what are the things that maybe you need to work out as a community. And then building the foundations of how you're going to do that. So that as a group, that might mean actually understanding what kind of organization you're going to be. Are you going to be a co-housing? Are we starting with the idea of a site that we want to set aside for affordable housing from our community, in which case we might want to be a CLT, a community land trust? Or is it the fact that we just want to get together with like-minded people and to create a community of our own? And maybe it's something like more like a co-op or co-housing scheme. And then moving on from there, what kind of decision-making processes are we going to need? What kind of governance do we need? And starting to build that into what we call, it starts off as a plan, becomes a business plan as we go along. And how we actually put some of those ideas, how we define them, how we get them down on paper, and then how we take them to the next level. And another one is signposting where you get the right help from. So that might include designers, really importantly. It really might include legal help. So people who could help us work out what those rules are, work out what that legal form of an organization will be. So people like Wrigley's, who we work really closely with in Leeds. It might include other kind of professionals who can help us. Might be environmental people who can help us design the kind of sustainable homes that we want. It might be cost engineers, people like that. So it's really important to know where the help is that you need to get, and that's part of the process we do. And then finally, it's kind of planning that route out, taking it forward, and moving it on to the next stage. So that's what I would say to anybody who's starting out is come to us to talk, and we can help guide you through that group stage and then set out that pathway as to how you're going to go forward, because there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You can work through people like schemes like Lilac and schemes like Chaco have done, and kind of build yourselves, or it might be working more closely in partnership with other organizations that can do some more of the heavy lifting for you, and that might include us. And there's loads and loads of places you can go for more information as well. So we obviously this will be shared, and these links are just take you to some of the different places where there's lots of resources around to help, and that includes us. So that's been a really quick whistle-stop tour of community-led housing. I'm going to leave it open now to questions. So thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, there's a lot in there. But obviously, like I said, I'll share that with everyone that's signed up, so you can share that and go through it at your leisure as well. Do we have any questions? Everyone's quiet. Okay. Oh yes, Catherine. Hooray.
Hi, sorry, I'll just start my video because it was easier not to have it on for you guys
Yeah.
whilst Jim was speaking. So hi,
Yeah.
part of Leeds, which is stuck in the developing group stages. I'm sure Sylvia will agree, who's also on this call, and there's possibly Adrian and Ursula also on this call as well from Shangri Leeds. So what is Leeds looking like in terms of site availability now? Because that's where we mainly got stuck.
Yeah, that is that is one of the difficulties in Leeds, is finding the site that meets your requirements, because Leeds is yeah, it's a difficult place to find places to build. Even, you know, a lot of the housing associations can't find places to build in Leeds anymore, so it is difficult. There are things you can do to look more widely, and maybe broaden what you're prepared to consider as a geographic area for, or maybe even type of housing. That's probably what I'd say is maybe we need to do. We need to look a little bit more widely in terms of what's available.
Okay, and I don't want to tread on Sylvia's toes because she's very, hot on more than I am in terms of how the groups run, really. But in terms of, you were saying as part of one of your slides there, you can assist with helping the initial stage of getting a group together as a functional group.
Yes.
We've dwindled in numbers, partly through, lost site opportunities and partly from people moving on, et cetera, et cetera. So are you able to help with that?
Yeah, and one of the things we really want to do, as and part of we're doing a revamp of our website at the moment. And what we really want to do is actually make our PPH website, People Powered Homes website, a real, if you like, networking center. So we want to be able to allow anybody who hears about community-led housing in Leeds to look on there and see, oh, I'm interested in joining a group. There's a group there called Shangri Leeds. I can, what the contact details. So what we're going to be looking to do is if we haven't already, is go out to all of the groups we're talking to and try and get a bit more information and populate it a little bit more, get local contacts. And we want to, plot on there, where people are looking at building as well, so that when there are people from specific localities, maybe you're in South Leeds, what's happening near me? I don't want to, maybe you want to live near where you live, and you don't want to live in a co-housing scheme up in North Leeds. Maybe you want to get together with like-minded people from your kind of broad area. So we want to try and create that opportunity as well, so that people can start to use the website to coalesce a little bit. So we recognise that's a really difficult thing to do sometimes, is raise awareness.
Great. Do you have sorry, just before we leave this question, do you have a time scale for that?
We've got somebody working on our website at the moment, so hopefully in the next
Yeah.
6 weeks or so, Lucy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've got Shangri-Leeds' form already, actually. So we're sending out to the groups that we know to fill in a form so that we can then turn that into a map, basically, on the website.
All right. Yeah.
So that's in progress at the moment. That's with the designer.
Yeah. Okay then.
And we also, on top of that, what we want to do is try and do some more sort of larger scale kind of workshop events. So we're building some of our resources up so we can kind of help groups go through different phases. And as we do that, what I want to try and do is do a few of those on a bigger level, so we can involve people, and that will help. So maybe work with 3 or 4 groups on a kind of a workshop, and that way there can be a little bit of cross Germanization of some of the ideas, and maybe membership as well.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, good idea.
Cool. Sylvia,
Sylvia?
you got your hand up.
Hi, nice to see you, Catherine. We have been stuck for a long time and disappointed. We've looked for loads of different places, and we try and keep ourselves up to date on going to your space and so on. But we're thinking that these models don't work for us. We've got a group of people who some may be homeowners and some may be non-homeowners and in rented accommodation and so on, and the impact in North and West Leeds of the massive student populations there, which means, but that's changing too with the move towards PBSA, but private student accommodation blocks.
Yeah.
And people, students moving into the new purpose-built student accommodation. That's it, PBSA, purpose-built student accommodation. So that some of the houses there are, the multi-occupied houses are less in demand. And wondering about if there's any way that we could create community, sharing our homes and maybe other places, and having one house with a common house part. What would be your ideas about how we could go forward with that sort of idea, Jimm?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, and it would kind of look a bit like more of an old-fashioned co-op, actually, I think, in some ways. I think that the difficulty, I guess, is identifying property that's close enough in area that's affordable. And I suppose so there's 2 elements of that. It's finding the right property, but it's also lining up the finances to be able to purchase property. Because again, even though you're absolutely right, there is that kind of demographic movement, I think, quite a little bit away from every student being in a house in Headingley, but that's not going to happen overnight, and values in Headingley aren't just going to drop half overnight. So I think there is still quite a lot of logistical thinking to do, but it's a really interesting idea, and I would love to have a chat with you about how we might think about that.
Any other questions before I'm going to get Catherine? Oh, is that a thumbs up?
Yeah, thumbs up to that, to what Jimm said, Sylvia. Yeah.
Brilliant. If we've got no more questions immediately, I'll get Ed to have a little chat. If you're there, Ed.
I'll just finish off on one point, just Lucy, just to kind of put a little bit more optimism on things. We've been, as a sector, we've been waiting for funding to come through for a long time. We've been a little bit in the wilderness, but I think there's really good noises that there is some money coming through into the sector. So certainly where we might be able to get some early investment, certainly where we might be able to secure land and pre-development funding. So the landscape does feel like it's changing, and that might really unlock some opportunities for us. And also there's changes in the planning system coming through as well that again might potentially unlock some sites that were closed off to us previously. So although things have been really difficult, I'm kind of guardedly optimistic that we might find some opportunities open up for us over the course of the next 12 to 18 months or so. So I think there is some grounds for optimism.
Great.
I'll
Ed?
take over now.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah. I'm outside. Hope it's not too noisy and windy.
Sounds
Right.
okay.
Great, good. So yeah, so really briefly for me, so my name's Ed. I live down in Beeston and have done for the last 20 or 25 years. And I'm now, as of in the last few years, I'm one of the local city councillors for Hunslet and Riverside. I have for many years, as perhaps others have, looked jealously over places like Lilac and Chaco, and thought, wouldn't it be nice to do something like that somewhere in South Leeds? I'm perhaps particularly thinking inner South Leeds, so LS10 or LS11, but I don't know, I'm happy to be flexible and see what happens. Certainly, as we all know, the housing crisis is very, very real for lots of people. So I don't have really strong feelings about where that should go, but I'm really interested to see if a small team of people could start to form, start to coalesce around the idea. That might be people who don't yet live in South Leeds, but who are passionate about community-led housing. But I think it would also, I'd very much want it to be grounded in a bunch of people who are already here in South Leeds, so that it kind of is an authentic Indigenous thing. So I think that's me really. I suppose I think here in South Leeds, like of course land is at a premium, yet at the same time I also think land prices and house prices are cheaper than elsewhere. There are patches of land that I've got my eye on that I think maybe would be feasible, but yeah, you would need a team of people, as happens with Lilac and Chaco and others, to really this. So maybe people on this call, or maybe people you know on this call, might become part of that.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a call to action that we could maybe put into our next newsletter for you, Ed. South Leeds, we'll talk, we'll get something, yeah. Catherine would be interested in being in the loop for that as well. So I guess maybe, because you'll all have my email address, so if that's something that anyone on the call is interested in, send me, just reply to me and let me know, and then I can maybe pass your details on to Ed and start something up.
And if you've got specific sites, Ed, that might be worth a conversation about starting it. Yeah, because it's really about starting a conversation, and is that site, if you talk about a site, are there local people who are interested in getting involved with it? And that's what you really need, is to raise a banner and see if anybody comes. So yes, that'll be great to have that chat.
Yeah. So my thinking is, and yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking to myself, even if there was just one person, and not naming names, but maybe you, Catherine, if there was just one person who had the capacity just to start to connect with people. So I know a few people who I think who have said they are maybe interested in this. And so even if someone started to do outreach with those, and there's certainly a couple of people who gave apologies for tonight, but yeah, just able to kind of phone those people, and I can be that conduit person. And then if we then form a group that we could meet, and then if we feel we've got traction, then we could come back to you, Leeds Community Homes, and say, start to get the conversation going in a more tangible manner.
And I'm sure we could host a little meeting up at the Climate Hub, if that's something that would be interesting. And we've got Abby as well, not to put you on the spot, Abby, from who's the climate worker for the Beeston Hub. So if you haven't already met, I think that would be a good connection there.
Fantastic. Yeah, that would be great if we can make that an objective that we can take out of today's meeting. That would be fantastic.
I'm going to add that to my newsletter. list. Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts or comments they want to throw into the mix at this point before we close it up?
Just to chip in, Jim. I think hello to everybody. I work for Wrigley's Solicitors now and used to work in finance for Ecology Building Society for those who might know me from there. But I just, still talking to a lot of potential groups around and to other umbrella organisations like Leeds Community Homes, and I think there is that feeling that we might be heading towards a bit of an uptick in politically the sort of funding picture that doesn't necessarily address all our problems in terms of trying to find sites and so on, but it does feel like we might be sort of blinking into a bit of a lighter period, hopefully, in terms of political and financial will, after what's been a bit of a tricky patch. I think it's fair to say, for those who have been in this sort of field for a long time, these things are inevitably a bit cyclical. But yeah, I mean, from our point of view, I think we're trying to keep in touch with all the sort of relevant parties and be involved and help where we can in terms of advising groups and so on. So it's nothing more than really just to sort of say, yeah, I'd sort of echo those green shoots of optimism that Jim referred to, and if there's anything that we can do as lawyers to sort of help push messages or sort of lobby for change where it's needed, please do feel free to drop me a line or give me a shout, and we'll do our very best.
Just to say thank you for the positivity that I've got from this call. We've just been through a bit of a rough